It's always a pleasure each year to talk to some of my fellow film critics as a roundup of the year in terms of films that have been released and what are the best films and so on. And it's always a pleasure to talk to Sharon Hurst, who runs a blog, Hursto's 5-Minute Films, as well as appearing on 3CR. Sharon, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you, Pete. It's great to be here with you.
And it has certainly been quite a year in cinema. In fact, not always in cinema.
That's right.
And now with a flurry, we're back, and so many films are being released.
They are. It's like they've all been clamoring to get off the shelves, and suddenly we are inundated, aren't we? It's sort of more than I can cope with at the moment, I think.
There are lots and lots of films, but it's always good, even if films are released on streaming or whatever, they're still releases. So I'm always interested in hearing your list, Sharon, of your best films of the year.
Okie dokie. Well, let's go for it. And I always stress that they are not in any particular order, because to me, it's always like comparing apples and oranges. It doesn't work to compare a serious drama with a comedy, but two of them might make the list. So in no particular order. However, having said that, I think the one that really blew me away for the year was Anthony Hopkins' performance in The Father. Oh, just totally grabbed me, you know, got me in the heart. And I've always admired him so much as an actor, and everything about it was poignant, beautifully done. The structure of the film, I believe it was based on a play, and so it had a, you know, quite a theatrical structure to it. But this, yeah, I think ends up as pretty much my top film, particularly that interesting structure where as an audience, you don't quite know what the truth is. For quite a while, you're thinking in this film, now hang on, that wasn't the same girl as before, but she says she's his daughter. What's going on here? Have I missed something? But of course, as the film progresses, we realise this is a reflection of his mental state. And I thought that was so clever as a structural device. But beyond that, it was totally about the depth of emotion that bloke can bring to his acting, which has always been magnificent. I rewatched Remains of the Day the other day, and I thought, yep, you saw it way back then. You see it in everything he's in. So The Father was the one that stood out for me in the year as unmissable.
Yeah, excellent film. Okay.
Now, Pete, you mentioned things streaming on the television, and of course I've been sitting like a big slug glued to things like Netflix and so on this year, and Foxtel and various, and of course we are so lucky as critics in that we get sent the links to be able to watch our previews when we couldn't go in the cinema. But one thing that came on, I think it was Netflix, yes, and this, I guess I'm choosing this very much because of content, but also I think was brilliantly made. I think it's almost the most important film socially of the year, called David Attenborough, A Life on Our Planet, one of those BBC productions, an hour-and-a-half documentary in which the man finally stands up and says, after constantly saying, isn't the world beautiful, isn't it great, look at these lovely animals, he says, hello, the planet is in dire straits, it's going to be totally kaput very soon unless we do something. And the thing that, aside from the content being so in your face and shocking, even though we already know it, but he managed to condense it all so much in this hour and a half that was so persuasive. And I thought, boy, they should be getting every politician, say those who are at the latest climate meeting, strap them to their chairs and force them to watch it over and over until the message sinks in. It was a beautiful homage to his career as a person in film who is vitally concerned with environment. And I just thought it was a stunningly made film that everybody should be watching because the message is so critical. So that was one of the streaming films that made my top films of the year.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah. Now, a bit of a more obscure one, I think, because you'll have seen it, I'm sure, Pete, but I don't know who else will have. Roy Andersson, is he Swedish or Norwegian filmmaker?
Swedish, yeah.
Yeah, he made this amazing film called About Endlessness, which to me was an incredible use of the cinematic medium, almost using it like a painting, such that as an audience you sat and watched the minutiae of, oh, boing, I'm sure you heard that, watched the minutiae of people's lives as they as they just go about their business day to day.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's a celebration, I guess, of life in all its beauty, in all its horror, in all its sadness, in happy moments, in bizarre things, unusual things. A most unusual and fascinating film, but it just stuck with me really, really vividly. You know, I thought, wow, this is quite an unusual use of the filmic medium, because, you know, film's usually about conventional narrative, or often about conventional narrative. So this one, again, stuck out for me. Okay, so about endlessness. And it had won a 50 gazillion awards at Venice, and deservedly so, you know. Now, we have to, I guess, bring up good old Nomadland, which Frances McDormand and Chloe Zhao won awards for. Another very meditative film, I guess, meditating on the life of a person who has become displaced, disaffected, and yet not displaced, because the life that this woman lives, chuffing along on the road in her van and meeting those people who live a similar life, like the grey nomads, as we call them in Australia, just something very beautiful. And she was connected, even though she wasn't connected to what we perceive as the sort of societal connections that we tend to have, people like you and me, but she connected with all those people that she met on the road, and sometimes reconnected with them. And there was something so sort of eternally sad and poignant about it, and yet very, very beautiful. I like the way that Chloe Zhao made this film, and I love the fact that she used people who weren't actors. Some of them were the real nomads out and about on the go, just rising to the occasion beautifully, to be sort of stars in their own lives, and relating to the Frances McDormand character. So yeah, I think that it was lovely, and that melancholy and the majesty of the wide open spaces in those American roads, because that's what they're like. So yeah, I think that Nomadland was a worthy winner of the awards it got.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw that film late last year, and so I included it on my list last year as one of the best films of the year. So it's interesting because you're right. It wasn't released properly until January this year, I think, something like that.
That's right. And it's so easy to forget the films we saw in January, isn't it? I must confess, without my lists, Pete, you know, I'd be going, oh, did I even see that? You know, I mean, obviously, I remember I saw that one, but it's the list that finally reminds me of everything. Because for me, I know you see hundreds of films a year, but I probably saw more than I have in any year this year. So I really needed my list. Okay, so here's one that I just adored. I didn't see it on the big screen. I would have loved to have seen it on the big screen. An animation from the Pixar studio. Soul, a most unusual little story. I think it's an animation for adults very much. I do not see that little kids would really understand what was going on there, and even the whole issue of dying and mortality and going off to the great yonder might traumatize them. So this was quite a convoluted little tale about a piano player called Joe, voiced by Jamie Foxx, who finally gets the big gig that he's always wanted. And he's so happy he's walking home joyously and doesn't see a rather large manhole in the middle of the road, and whoop, down he goes, and suddenly finds himself on a large escalator going to wherever, the great beyond, heaven. But he is given an opportunity to perhaps, well, to reflect on lots of things. But he also discovers that this place is a place where they prepare new little raw souls for going down to the earth. So there's many different plot threads, I guess, in this about, you know, what's happened to him personally, that he wants to get back to earth, and the little souls. And he has to be a bit of a mentor to some of these souls to sort of reprieve or retrieve his situation. The thing that I adored about this was its creativity. I just thought, whoa, this is such an out there story with so many plot threads. I love the animation of it, which was very diverse. I mean, it wasn't just one style. There was a huge amount of realistic animation. And when he played the piano, because I do know a bit of music, I saw he's playing exactly the right notes, and I thought, that's very good. No one can say it wasn't the right fingering on the piano. And then it went into an almost Picasso style of vaguely abstract stuff when the little souls were around, and all these different styles with colour and movement and plot happening, never resting for a moment. But emotionally, and I think you know me well enough, Pete, these days to know that if a film doesn't grab me emotionally, I can admire it technically, but I tend to, unfortunately, not bond with it. But this one struck me emotionally. I found myself very, very emotionally drawn in and moved. I thought it was a beautifully made film.
Yes, I agree. It's interesting how the plot is very similar to Heaven Can Wait.
Yes, yes, yeah, yes. So when I said original, it's, you know, nothing's ever totally original, but its presentation was so original.
Sure.
I thought the visuals of it, yeah, it was beautiful. So, and musicians would just love this film as well. You know, I think musos would really have a good time with that one. So yeah, so that's an animation in the middle of it. Now back to streaming. I'm just looking at another trusty list here. Jane Campion's just released her latest film, and I'm sure you've caught up with this one on Netflix, Power of the Dog, which, yes, has thoroughly impressed me. I think that, normally Benedict Cumberbatch is, you know, Mr. Nice Guy, but this character that he plays, a Western, but set in the 1920s in Montana. Two brothers, one who's your real man's man, the cowboy, the hard-living guy, and his brother who's a bit the gentleman in his suit. And they meet a woman who's running the local diner, the gentle brother played by, and I've got to remember, what's his name? I never remember that chap's name.
Jesse Plemons.
Yes, Jesse Plemons, thank you. Jesse Plemons, who plays George, the brother, marries Rose from the diner, played by Kirsten Dunst. She comes with a little boy in tow, played by our Aussie, Jodie Smith-McPhee. Cody, not Jodie, Cody Smith-McPhee, interesting name. And he's quite an unusual little boy, a little bit effeminate. So, of course, the cowboys give him hell. And obviously don't want to say too much about plot here because it certainly has some interesting twists in this. But I think, again, what Campion generates in terms of the vastness of the landscape that they all live in, down to the intimacy of those relationships that are really rubbing up against each other and grating, and the way they all relate to each other. And then she builds up this amazing threatening feeling because Rose is quite perturbed as to a relationship that develops between her son and Phil. And as an audience, you're thinking, where is this going? And I won't tell you where it's going. But again, this was just a fabulous scripting and a fabulous filming, I thought, and everything about it shows she's a master filmmaker. So Power of the Dog is another winner for me.
It is an excellent film, and it was shot completely in New Zealand, interestingly enough.
I saw that on the credits because it sure passed for Montana. It looked great. I unfortunately saw it on Netflix, and I think, did you see it on the big screen, Pete?
I did, yes.
It must have been amazing on the big screen. I have to go back one day and catch it on the big screen. Yep. So that was a beauty that made my list. Now, I'm a sucker for music films, as I think you know. And there was a terrific one that came out directed by Gracie Otto, the daughter of our Barry Otto, about good old George Martin, the Beatles producer, who for some period in the 1970s set up a recording studio on the island of Martinique, an island that has an active volcano. And he set up a studio, very much a replica of his London studio that musicians could come to. And all these really famous people turned up, like Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits, Paul McCartney, Elton John, who else? I've got them all on my list. Duran, Jimmy Buffett, more and more. The Police, all turning up to record there at this fabulous music studio in the shadow of the volcano. And in many ways, they didn't have their famous personas on. They were just blokes having a chance for a bit of a holiday, relating to the locals who taught them how to dance and were happy to, you know, bring food and drinks for them. It had an intimate feeling, even though you were dealing with all these incredibly famous people. The music was fantastic. It just, a film that I found so uplifting and so beautiful. as the title would indicate, doesn't have a totally happy ending, and it doesn't matter, I guess, to reveal it, because it's a matter of historical fact that eventually the volcano blew its top and the whole studio was sort of lavaed away. But they all had a very good time up until then. And this, for music lovers and fans of that vintage of music, I think it's one of those sort of must-see films. So Under the Volcano made it big time for me. So here we are.
I agree. It's a terrific doco, and great found some amazing footage, which some of which had never been seen before.
That's right. You think, where do they dredge up this footage from? Literally from the vaults, isn't it? Like the Beatles one, which of course has just very recently also blown me away, being a diehard Beatles fan from the 60s. But the one that we saw was a little bit different to the 3-part that's streaming, isn't it? We saw the taster. We saw the 100-minute film in which Peter Jackson sits nursing various guitars saying, hey guys, I've made this 3-part film on the Beatles called Get Back, and you can watch it. But he introduces it and he says, and this is one of my favorite segments. So I have yet to watch the 8.5-hour 3-parter on Netflix, but the segment that I saw again just stood out in my mind, this thing of seeing people who are so iconic and famous, but in their Mr. Ordinary suits. You know, here we are in the recording studio, verbally stoushing with each other or joking with each other, and the revelation of their creativity, their musicianship, how they could not even count a song in and just start like that, the 4 of them together, and how they organically just created a song almost off the top of their heads, just as a reflection of pure genius. Well, that's how I see it, because as I say, I'm a diehard Beatles fan. And this one, as a feat of filmmaking from Peter Jackson, you mentioned footage never before seen. Apparently, he was given access to, what was it, 180 hours of audio and 60 or 70 hours of video, and yet he manages to cobble this thing together into something that you feel like you're hanging out with him in the studio, joy of joys. And I think, again, for music lovers, this is amazing. Music has really figured for me this year, Pete, in so many of the docos and films I've seen. I think it's been a great year for music docos. Just fabulous.
Great. Okay.
I guess we have to mention Minari, because I thought that was a beautiful film, the Korean film Minari, about the family trying to make a go of farming, and old granny comes over to live with them, and the little boy, and the whole family dynamic. One of those gentle films, American, but nowhere in the mainstream of American stuff, just really gentle and beautiful. And the thing that struck me about that, I guess, in terms of its script, was the beautiful character, and you're going to have to remind me who plays that other crazy old farmer who befriends him and helps him with his work.
Will Patton?
Yes, that was him, Will Patton, a bit of a crazed Bible-bashing born-again fellow, but he's so generous of spirit towards the Korean family. And I thought, what a contrast to what's going on in the world today, you know, quite unnerving, and it puts it in such relief. But this was a beautiful, gentle film with the intimate theme of family, but obviously the broader themes of tolerance and kindness and all those sorts of things. So Minari for me was a beautiful film. Now, a couple of others. I don't know how you're going to like this one, because this is possibly not objectively some grand piece of filmmaking, but it's something that I just loved. Like, I just smiled my way through this film. An unlikely lead man playing a Frenchman, an Irishman playing a Frenchman. Sharon Hurst plays a Frenchman. We never find out his name. He is simply the man in the hat, who's sitting in a little cafe in Marseille, and he sees some dudes who pull up in a car doing something that he thinks is suspicious, and then he thinks, oh my gosh, they've seen me see them, they're after me. And he starts chuffing around these beautiful areas of France in his funny little Fiat car that he's almost too big for. As he perceives it being chased by them, things are not always as they seem. And there's this amazing musical track that goes with it. He meets some of the same people over and over and over, the girl on the bike and people running various cafes, and he seems to go around in circles. And the variety of songs in the soundtrack were beyond belief. And because he never really has to speak, it doesn't matter that he's an Irishman playing a Frenchman. I just thought it was one of the cutest things I've seen in a long while, and it made me feel so happy watching this film that I thought, okay, let's put it on the good corner list. So that made my list.
Okay. Yes, I enjoyed it. It's a bit like Jacques Tati, who
yes,
is very much a visual filmmaker, and
right.
coincidences and events occur and so on.
Yeah, indeed. So right. I thought it was a gorgeous one.
Yep.
Have I missed anything out of my top list? I've got lots of sort of honourable mentions. I don't know if you're keen on having honourable mentions at all. Or
I'm happy to hear a few honourable mentions, yes.
A few honourable mentions. Well, another thing that streamed on Netflix, a very unknown Indian film called Is Love Enough, Sir, which really showed up the caste system in India about a young woman who works as a maid for her very wealthy master in Bombay. And it's obvious that there is quite a attraction and synergy between these two people, but the system doesn't allow for anything like that to be even contemplated. The master is engaged to some rich woman who's not a very nice person at all. So it was a beautiful sort of, not even unrequited, but unable to be unfulfilled love story, while at the same time showing up the Indian caste system. And this I thought was a lovely little gem that I stumbled across and thought, yes, beauty, thank you, Netflix. So that was a stunner.
Okay.
Recently, the Aussie film, do we say Nitram or Nitram, about the dreaded Martin Bryant, who committed those shocking slaughter in Port Arthur. And this is an amazingly made film by Justin Kurzel, and a lot of people say Kurzel. They don't want to see it, but I say to them, well, you don't actually see what he does, so you don't have to stress about that. But as a picture of family dysfunction and major disturbance, with the two Davis women, Essie Davis and Judy Davis and Anthony LaPaglia as friends and relatives, and Caleb Landry Jones, just inhabited this creepy guy who, I mean, it's not even a film that tries to justify him. It's just showing the arc of a journey, how such terrible things can happen. And again, brilliant piece of filmmaking.
Yes, I fully agree with you. It just won lots of awards at the Australian Academy Awards.
Yes, I did see that afterwards. Yeah. The festivals had a lot of interesting things this year, and one that I saw in MIF, again, a music film, I'm getting boring with all these music films, about a genre of music called the Congolese rumba. It was called the Rumba Kings.
Yes, well.
Wasn't that a great doco?
Yes.
It showed the way the Congolese people kept their spirits up with this fantastic genre of music, and eventually it almost contributed to leading to their breaking loose from colonialism. And it was just vibrant. And again, I keep saying that at the risk of repeating myself for music lovers, it's a must-see. So it was a stunner. Another one, I think this was also at MIF, a very interesting doco by Molly Reynolds. Now, I know a lot of people would probably not sit through this. They'd say boring, called Show Papa. You've seen it, yeah. A guy who actually suffers from this dreadful condition of a sort of degenerative spine, I think it was. And because COVID's happening in London, he can't go anywhere. He just sits in his house. And in collaboration with Molly Reynolds, he made this doco, sort of all done over the internet, in which he films himself just, slapping his sorry self around his house every day. So I couldn't believe that I got so engaged with this, thinking, what an amazing man, and talking to camera and saying, this is what's my day's like, and I had a bad day, and here's my little kid, my little niece and nephew knocking at the window and saying, come out to play, uncle. Oh, I can't, I'm not allowed to go anywhere, COVID, and I'm sick and I'm vulnerable. But as an insight into the travails of some people's lives, I just thought, my gosh, and what a feat of filmmaking to be totally done over the internet. and then put together. I think this is something that I'd love to see get a mainstream release, because I think it was fabulous.
Yeah, hopefully it will. I spoke to Molly Reynolds about it, and it seems it's a dramatic construction of real events. And he himself is an actor as well.
Yes.
So yes, and he filmed himself, but in terms of a structure that he and Molly put together, and it was filmed over a long period of time, but a really interesting sort of documentary / docudrama in a way.
That's right, because I found I had to look up the notes to say, well, what's true and what's not about this. And when I found out he really is suffering that condition, I thought, oh, you poor man. And yet he was reasonably philosophical in a way, you know, very impressive. Yeah, so that really struck me. I love Blue Bayou, the story, another Korean family, to do with the issue in America of some people who apparently were adopted when they were little but never got official papers. And then if they are caught for any misdemeanor, they're in the firing line for being deported. And again, the intimacy of the family situation, because he was a lovely father, his wife, he adopted his wife's little girl, plus they're expecting their first child, but then the system gets their mitts on him and everything threatens to blow apart. This was a gut wrencher, and I thought beautifully done. So many, Pete, so many. In the Japanese Film Festival, there was an incredible documentary about a filmmaker called Satoshi Kon, who I must confess in my ignorance I'd never heard of. A Japanese animator, a totally different style of animation from Studio Ghibli, but that film about this animator, who I think only ever made about 4 films, then died very young of cancer. And I immediately thought, whoa, I've got to find his films and start watching them. It was just a magnificently put together doco that features segments from Satoshi Kon's film, but also a real insight into Satoshi Kon's work and life. So that one stood out for me incredibly. It was a great year for environmental films, part of things like the Melbourne Doco Film Festival and what were some of the other ones, but films about the forests dying, Cry of the Forests in Australia, A Fire Inside about the New South Wales firefighters, so many things that, again, we need all those people strapped to their seats to get the message, you know, and sort of do something. And I think they were all extremely well made. They struck me as so good, those films. In the mainstream, there were a few that stood out. I don't usually talk about super mainstream films, but the recent one, Dune, I must confess, I was pretty impressed by the making of it, even though it's got a lot of you think it's predictable because you say, oh, it's like Star Wars, but then you go, well, hello, Frank Herbert wrote Dune about 10 years before Star Wars even emerged. So these things were the groundbreaking things, and I think it was a visual tour de force. I thought the new James Bond, No Time to Die, was a very pleasant surprise from so many of the other James Bonds. Looked great and had all the requisite excitement, and this in the mainstream area, I thought it was good. And I thought the Disney version of Cruella, the background to Cruella de Vil, was a visual feast, a feast of costumery for the eyes, and the 2 Emmas, Emma Thompson and Emma, I'm going to forget her last name, the other Emma.
Stone.
Thank you, Emma Stone. Yeah. I thought they really bounced off each other beautifully. So they stood out in the mainstream for me. Going back to docos and honourable mentions, a little modest Israeli film called Breaking Bread, about a food festival in Haifa where an Arab woman decides she'll run a food festival and have an enforced teaming up of about 30 Israeli chefs with 30 Arab chefs, and saying, you guys are going to cook together, you're going to share your recipes, and then you're going to take it to the streets and everyone's going to come and have a good old nosh up, which they did. A sort of film you don't want to go hungry to. Oh, this looks so delicious, everything they were cooking up. But again, it's one of those films with so much, as well as the heart in it, of the friendships that develop between these people. Like some of them saying, oh, I've never really had an Arab friend before. Oh, I've never had a Jewish friend. But the importance, of that whole issue of tolerance, and you don't know anyone till you meet them. And this was I thought the message was so important. And that to me was a very beautiful film.
Yeah.
the thing that won a big award at Cannes, I'm wondering if I should even mention this one, Bad Luck Banging Loony Porn. This was an extraordinarily weird Romanian film with some pretty heavy-duty messages and some heavy-duty pornographic scenes in it, but something that doesn't go away from your brain at all. It, I guess, made the honourable mentions for me about hypocrisy and condemning other people for mistakes they may have inadvertently stumbled into when everyone else is a raging hypocrite. So that was an interesting one. I loved The Sound of Metal, about the young drummer who lost his hearing and was forced to learn sign language and sort of learn a bit of humility, I guess. I thought that was a beautiful performance by Riz Ahmed and a very beautifully made, touching film. I like the comedy. Oh, a comedy at last. I don't have many comedies in my list, do I? Everything I've got sort of either musical or deathly serious. I love Mads Mikkelsen in that Danish comedy Riders of Justice, which was just a zany, semi-idiotic revenge film in many ways. I found that very entertaining and beautiful. I liked a lot of films in the Melbourne Queer Film Festival. Rurangi, a New Zealand film about a young boy who comes home and wants to come out to his father and feels quite threatened. And I love Finlandia, about the transgender people, the mushas of some Oaxaca in Mexico. Yeah, I thought that was a visually stunning film. So yeah, all of those things, I mean, 50 gazillion of them, they just ended up making my top films list, you know, with so many others that I just picked up on Netflix, docos about Dolly Parton, Keith Richards, Nina Simone, Miriam Makeba, all these fabulous music docos that will always, I think, stand out for me in this year, you know, as just more honourable mentions than you can shake a stick at.
Well, that's quite a list, Sharon. I'm very impressed. So thanks for that. I do want to ask you, I know you generally avoid some of the more problematic films or the ones that you think, oh God. But is there anything you did see during the year that really disappointed you?
Yes. I was very disappointed with Judi Dench, who I normally love, with Eddie Izzard in that film 6 Minutes to Midnight, with the story of the German girls that came to live in the boarding school, and right, everyone's trying to pacify the German Reich. So that really disappointed me, because I normally love Judi Dench. A sci-fi film that looked interesting visually from the opening scene, called Little Joe, about these people working in a very interesting scientific lab creating most unusually coloured flowers that seem to have dire effects on the psyche of the people who managed to touch them. I just thought, oh, it opened with such promise, looking so vibrant and visually impressive, and then to me, plot-wise, it went seriously downhill. Mm-hmm. And I must say, Nick Cage in Prisoners of the Ghostland, I found a big mashup of funny genres. I mean, look, it wasn't so terrible, because as you just said, I do try to avoid the really bad stuff, but I just thought, what a mishmash this is of genres. And after so loving Nick Cage in Pig, and then seeing him in this, sort of being like he phoned it in a way, you know, just looking a bit muscly and grumpy, and that really disappointed me. So there was really only three that got up my snout.
Hey, that should be the category. What films up your snout?
That's right. The Snout Awards.
Sharon, as always, great to talk to you, and thank you for that list. That is a very interesting collection of films that have impressed you and not so impressed you. But that's what I suppose cinema is all about. It's going to affect people in different ways, and I thank you so much for your comments.
Oh, Peter, thank you for having me on your show. It was lovely.
Always a pleasure, and I'll see you in the movies, maybe even before Christmas. Who knows?
Never know.
Sharon Hurst, thank you so much for talking with me.
Welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.